narrative of black people in the United States was, you know, you came from these primitive, savage people who had no history, and everything you are, we made you.
Strip the African of his knowledge of himself. You can then replace that knowledge with any falsification of consciousness you desire. Once you take from me my knowledge of myself, you can then tell me those lies.
Racism is what we are all living and breathing 24/7. There's never a moment, a second, a minute, an hour, a day, a year. For the past 500 years, when race has not been the dominant reality.
America has done all of these terrible to black people, and then they complain when we do it to ourselves. We're mirroring what they have always done to us since we got off those boats.
It's easy to sit up somewhere and talk with black people about black people, but it's not so easy to have to sit up and look at white people's face and talk to them about white people. Now that's what I know.
43 million black people, I think that probably 10% of our community at this moment in time would have a real consciousness about their ancient and modern history. That 90% of us don't have a clue of who we really are.
My mom used to say, you darker, work harder. The darker you are, the harder you have to work, and the smarter you have to be.
Folks were breastfed on racism. Breastfed them.
If you're talking about a problem in the world and you're not dealing with white supremacy, you ain't talking about the problem.
There's never been a real dialogue in America about race, because whenever we start to talk about race, the conversation will venture into what's wrong with black people.
White people did whatever they wanted to do to black people. You know, so what are the rules?
African-American people have been constantly looking for the rules in America. Our whole experience here, we want to know what are the rules to be accepted by the dominant society, what are the rules to not experience racism in America. And every time we learn one rule, we're told those rules don't apply and there's another rule. When African Americans were first dropped off from the slave ships, we said, okay, what do we need to do to be accepted by the dominant society? We were told, well, if you change your name from those African names, we'll accept you then. So African people said, okay, we'll change our names. Can we be accepted? They said, well, no, not quite, because now you're using that voodoo and that African religion. If you take on our religion, then we'll accept you. So black people said, well, that's not a problem. I mean, we're familiar with Christianity because we have a version of that in Africa. The whole European Jesus thing, that's a new thing for us. But if you'll accept us and you'll lay off the racism, no problem. We'll be better Christians than you. Can we be accepted? The dominant society said, well, no, not quite, because now that African voodoo is still there. So maybe if you weren't so lazy, we'll accept you. So black people said, okay, well, we're slaves. Nobody works harder than a slave. We pick all this cotton, we do all this work. Nobody works harder than us. Can we be accepted? So the dominant society said, well, no, because now slavery is over and we don't need your work no more. So black people said, okay, well, how about hiring us since we have all the skills? The dominant society said, well, no, not quite, because we have white-only unions, so we don't need that. So African-American people said, okay, well, look, how about we just build our own communities? We'll build our Tulsa, Oklahomas, our Central Avenues in Los Angeles. We'll build our own prosperous communities, and we'll just leave you be. How about that? The dominant society said, well, no, you can't do that, because now you're making a little more money than us, and now you're becoming a threat, so we're going to burn those little communities down. So black people said, okay, how about this? We'll work for you. Just hire us. We'll keep our heads up. We'll have dignity. Will you accept us? The dominant society said, well, no, because you're being uppity now. We don't want uppity black folks. So black people said, okay, well, how about this? We'll just shuck and jive. We'll be entertainment for you. We'll tap dance, skin and grin, coon, do whatever. Can we be accepted? The dominant society said, well, we love the entertainment part of you, but we can't really respect that, so we won't accept you. So black people said, well, we'll just drop out completely. We won't even try to be accepted by you. We'll just hang out on the corner. We won't even try to become part of the dominant society. We'll just hang out in front of the liquor store. If we see something we like, we'll take it. We'll just do our thing. The dominant society said, well, no, you do that, we're going to arrest you. So black people said, okay, well, How about we just go in the house? We'll just get crumbs from you. We'll just stay in the house and watch TV because that way we can escape racism. But the thing is, when you look at television, what do you see? Negative image. Negative image, negative image, negative image of African American people. So the bottom line is there are no rules for the dominant society to accept black people as a whole. All the rules are there to keep you marginalized. And that brings us to rule number 1. Keep people confused as to what racism is.
First time I think I became aware of racism as a kid was watching cartoons. And then, they have cannibals cooking up people, and the way that the illustration was, you know what I'm saying? It was like, wow, like Africans don't look like that. Like, come on, guys, I get you making a joke. It's fun to poke little fun jokes at people's different characteristics, and point those out. But it went overboard when it came to Africans and cartoons.
Because racism is not a noun, it's a verb, it's an action. And in order for a person to practice racism or to be a racist, they have to not just have prejudice, they have to have power to influence the success or failure of another group's life. That's a racist. And we don't understand it. We think it's just not liking somebody.
Racism has to do with power. For example, a black person could stand on the corner and say every negative thing they could think of to say about a white person. They can't determine where the person lives, how much money the person is going to make, whether they're going to have health care. So racism is a power dynamic. It is a power system dynamic. And black people are the victims of racism. Calling a person names is not the same as being able to control every aspect of that person's life.
Racism means to control somebody's faith and destiny. I can hate you because you're Jewish, I can hate you because you're Irish, I can hate you because you're German. That's prejudice.
America was founded on racism. There's no institution that can get away from the founding principles of its origin. America was founded on the oppression of African people, the enslavement of African people. In order for you to get away from that, you're going to have to reconstruct American society from the bottom up.
Well, if you are struggling for your genetic survival, then the threat to your genetic survival has to become a target. And the black male is perceived as the threat to white genetic survival. It's because only males, whether they're white, black, brown, red, or yellow, can impose sexual intercourse. Females cannot impose sexual intercourse. So if the male, and if the black male is perceived consciously and or subconsciously as the genetic threat, then he has to be attacked. And so this is what we see, whether it's unemployment, incarceration, failure in school, because there is war going on.
The cloak of Obama, under the illusion of inclusion, as I like to call it, black people are suffering more now than they did under both George Bush and Bill Clinton. Our unemployment rate is higher. Our incarceration rate is higher. Every index of so-called progress for blacks is worse under Obama than the 2-3 previous presidents. You always put a black face in office when you're about to take things back from black people.
Let's be clear. I'm not suggesting that black people don't hate white people. There are plenty of black people that go, I hate you. I hate you. I call your names, get pictures of white people, throw darts at them. But you still get the loan. So the fact that black people don't like white people doesn't mean they have the power to affect them as an entire group.
See, white ain't a color, it's an attitude. And you got to have big bucks to be an attitude. But here's what they didn't hide. They said if you have 1/32nd Negro blood, you're a Negro. Now think about what they just told you. This is a cat who don't like me. He said if you have 1 132nd Negro blood. You know what that really means? And all they're equal. One Dick Gregory, you got to put 32 white boys next to me. Are you crazy?
Black people look at racism as a moral issue. And when you look at racism as a moral issue, especially for black people, you automatically relegate racism to the realm of religion. That's a problem, because now the solution to racism becomes baptizing or Islamicizing white people into the righteousness of God and equality. And the problem with that is that the church and the mosque, ironically, have been some of the biggest perpetrators of history, of racism in global history. The Roman Catholic Church was one of the first institutions to actually give permission, okay, for African people to quote unquote be reduced to servitude.
To get someone to actually think that someone else is inferior, you have to raise that type of mentality to a religious level. And that's why racism essentially was given its validation through the church. And it is the church that gave it a divine presence in order to say that whatever atrocities you commit in the name of the church is justified because these people did something against God that warrants their punishment and their social status.
What makes it so hard to fight it is because it's invisible. When you go to court and you sue for discrimination, when you go to court and you sue for racial prejudice, I didn't get hired because I was black. I was kicked out of school because I was black. You have to prove racist intent on part of the perpetrator. So racism, as white supremacy's chief weapon, is difficult to combat it, because you have to prove that the person who committed the act of racism had the deliberate intent of discriminating against you because of color. And because we are all humans, nobody's perfect. So there's a million reasons they can use as an excuse for why you didn't get hired. He didn't have enough experience. But you really didn't get hired because you were black. There's a million reasons they can use why you didn't get hired. He was overqualified. Now look at that. Talk about some reverse racism. You told me I couldn't get the job because I didn't have a college degree. I came back with a master's. Now you're telling me I'm overqualified. So now before I didn't get the job because I didn't have enough education, now I don't get the job because I got too much. So the problem with racism is that it can hide behind the everyday human errors that all of us have.
Blacks was called Africans, whites was called Europeans. You know how many people don't know there was more white slaves in America than black slaves? They call them indentured servants. Okay? So they came together one day in Savannah, and they overthrew the slave master in that whole area. So they said, wait a minute, let's think about this. Here's what we do. Let's call the Africans black folk and the Europeans white folk. That's where that came from. Nobody in the world referred to themselves as white folk.
There were no people classified as white before the 15 and 1600s. As a matter of fact, the term Caucasian is a very relatively new term. It was a guy named Johann Blumenbach who came up with that term around 1790, 1795. So these are relatively new terms.
Were there white people in antiquity? She asked that question. Were there white people? And certainly people with lighter skin existed. But did they perceive themselves as white? No, for neither the idea of race or the whole idea of whiteness, it didn't exist. Still a relevance given to that kind of idea. People were more interested in the regional stuff and where you, but there was no concept. Not until the construction of the mid-1800s notion of the Caucasian, Karl von Linnaeus and Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, who came up with this whole idea of this Aryan nation, just a whole basic fictitious hot mess. Did the whole idea of race and whiteness even appear? But with the emergence of that construct of whiteness came the emergence of white supremacy.
To know your history is everything, no matter who you are, especially black, because you're constantly being told that you were nothing but a slave. Constantly. No one began as a slave. That's not what God put you here for.
If you know anything about the history of slavery, that's the first thing that they did. They beat your history and your native tongue out of you. And what's amazing about America, even the state of Texas, the school board is now expunging slavery out of the books, so they won't have to be held accountable for what they did.
It's going to be difficult for people to prove intellectual inferiority. That's why even in our textbooks in school, they don't like to teach our children about black inventions. Because even greater than our African history are our American inventions. Because from nowhere, you're coming up with things that revolutionize the American social and economic order.
Well, basically, there is a proverb that says that the only thing that peoples of European descent ever created was the patent office, because they stole everybody else's ideas and put their name on it.
During slavery, because you were the property of your master, a lot of what we invented was automatically given credit to the master. The credit was forwarded to the master because we was property. We weren't allowed to take fame or notoriety for the things we created.
Anything that made work easier. Why would white people want to invent something that make work easier when they have black folks to do it?
You have a huge incentive to try to get things to move smoothly so that, you don't get any more lashes. Or somebody doesn't now have to sell someone else in your family. There was a lot of incentive to create invention.
And that's another thing. Most of our black inventors had to deal with idea theft. White folks would come in and say, we did it first because we didn't necessarily know the process or have the money to patent our inventions. So white folk will find out what a black person invented and go do it real fast and get their application in, because back then the process wasn't as thorough as it is now. Whoever got their application in first to the patent office, that's who got the patent. So we got thousands of inventions by black people. We'll never even know it because of the fact that they were stolen.
They don't want anyone to know that we invented things. If it wasn't for black people, white people couldn't take a dump. A black man invented the toilet, and he just made it white on purpose.
A slave by the name of Black Sam, Eli Whitney slave, created the idea for the cotton gin, and his master took it and patented it in his own name. How could he do that with no benefit of books? He wasn't even allowed to learn.
A lot of people assume just because African slaves were illiterate, they were ignorant. And there's a real big difference, because African people, they had a very elaborate language or elaborate languages over in Africa. When Africans were brought over here, they were taught a bastardized version of English, and they weren't even allowed to see the language written down. And they were taught the language by lower class Europeans who were living in the South. So even though there was that major obstacle, blacks still did phenomenal things. Thomas Edison was known for stealing people's inventions. He was known for taking the inventions of a few African-American inventors. Lewis Latimer, Granville T. Woods actually went to court with Thomas Edison, and Granville T. Woods actually won his case.
Thomas Edison tried to bring Granville T. Woods to court on that invention. And I just saw a commercial for Mazda, I believe, cars, where they said, here's a man holding 1,000 patents. Well, 90% of them he stole.
Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, who are probably considered America's two greatest inventors of all time. But guess who was designing their blueprints for the patent application? A black man. Now let's think about this for a minute. If you invent something, why do you need me to do the blueprints for the patent application? If it's your idea, how in the hell can I do the blueprints for it? You can't do the blueprints for my idea. I have to do them. So if Latimer is doing the blueprints, if he is your chief draftsman, and he's doing your blueprints for your patent application, Alexander Graham Bell, did you invent the telephone, or did Lewis Latimer invent the telephone?
Thomas Edison had a whole troop of people that was in his sweatshop, and depending on the invention, he would hand it over to that particular department and tell them, see what it is that does, and then do something a little different, and we'll patent that. And when he took Granville T. Woods' information and tried to make it his own, the court said no.
The watermelon and black people stereotype, that came and that was popularized by Thomas Edison. Around 1890, Thomas Edison put together this Nickelodeon reel, and there were these African-American men who were joking around, shucking and jiving and kind of mugging for the camera, and they were eating watermelon. And Edison filmed this, put this out, and the general public saw this, and they said, okay, African-American people must really love watermelon. And right after that film came out, thousands of postcards and all types of memorabilia flooded the market of African-American people eating watermelon. So that watermelon stereotype was popularized by Thomas Edison.
A lot of people don't know there's an African-American male who is significant, has patents on the first major computer chips that made computers operate.
Other inventors that we don't know about, essentially, who they call the father of the internet, was Philip Emeagwali, a Nigerian man who essentially created the connection for quantum bits of information so that multiple computers could actually communicate with one another.
During slavery, and this is well documented by white people, many of the masters, when they were sick, did not call for the physician. They called for the big mama on the plantation. And she would come with her medicine bag. They didn't have alcohol and rum. They had all types of things that she made from the herbs that she had planted. Some of them said, I don't want the doctor. Bring me the witch doctor, that voodoo woman who I own.
Africans took what they brought from Africa, which would be a ground hockey, and all they did apply the game to ice.
When the British were fighting the United States, there were African slaves or former slaves assisting the British in fighting the U.S. When the U.S. won and the Britons lost, many of the African Americans were sent to British colonies in West Africa, and many of the African Americans were sent into Nova Scotia, Canada. And they formed what we now know as hockey. They started to play this new game called hockey, which was something that Africans were doing in Africa. In ancient Kemet, there was a form of field hockey that they were playing. And they went into Canada and they created what we now know as hockey. And there were actually black Canadian hockey teams in the early sport of hockey that a lot of people don't know about. And there's a great book about that called Black Ice that talks about the early inventors of hockey who were men of African descent.
The baddest cowboy, black or white. This man was so bad that they called him the Invincible One. Just to say that there was nobody badder than this man in the West. And that's been co-signed. Brother's name, Bass Reeves. Now, Bass Reeves was a former slave who pretty much beat up on his master to get away.
When we think of runaway African slaves, we always think of the Africans sneaking away in the middle of the night, hiding, ducking and dodging behind trees, hiding in bushes, hiding in rivers. Bass Reeves decided he was not going to be a slave anymore, and not only was he not going to be a slave, he told his master, I'm going to beat you up before I leave. So he beat up his master, escaped and got away and went into Oklahoma, which was like an outlaw territory. So he actually got away and became very prominent in the Old West.
When they began to open up the Oklahoma territory, they needed to recruit people, and they recruited him because he knew the Creek language, he knew the Muskogee, he knew how to speak the Seminole language, he knew all of the natives of the area, and he sat with them to learn about their traditions. The real life of this black man, Bass Reeves, became the mythic legend of Hollywood white cowboy. He brought in 3,000, count them, 3,000 bad guys. I'm talking about the worst murderers. He got 3,000 of them, killed 14. All of who the Lone Ranger became when you saw him on TV was actually the life of Bass Reeves.
African people, in many ways, the Underground Railroad established African people moving west and establishing places to be able to protect them. And so in the study and the research of the Underground Railroad, you will find that there are African-American communities that were established and have been there from before people can actually talk about it historically.
Many people don't realize that African-American people founded and settled many cities around the country. Buffalo, New York was founded by a black man. They called him Black Joe Hodges. Many African-American people had a less volatile relationship with the Native Americans. A lot of the European settlers, they were beefing with the Native Americans. So they couldn't go go into certain areas and peacefully. But a lot of African American settlers would go in there and they had somewhat of a camaraderie with the Native American people. In Los Angeles, 44 African American families came to Los Angeles and founded Los Angeles. The governor of what was then known as Alta California, which is now the state of California, the governor was a man of African descent named Pio Pico. And there's a street out here in Los Angeles called Pico Boulevard named after him. You had an African-American woman named Biddy Mason, who was a very wealthy landowner in early Los Angeles. So African-American people were very prominent in founding many cities around America.
Chicago was a city founded by Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable, a brother of Haitian background coming up through and founding this city in Chicago, because that is what the indigenous people called it in this part of Illinois. Now, Seneca Village really is a misnomer for Senegal Village. Seneca Village was a community in New York City that was purchased by freed Africans when the enslavement of African people was abolished in 1827. Senegal Village became a meeting place for African people in general. The backstory, it is believed that Senegal Village became part of the Underground Railroad for African people. Starting in 1855, you're going to have people start to call it a shanty town, where people who are squatters, they're going to demean the importance of Senegal Village. Going to say, you see all these African people moving up in here, and they're squatters, they don't belong there, and we need to create a park. And so they begin to put themselves upon the people. Finally, the mayor signs an edict saying, eminent domain, you got to get out. And so by 1857, the last Africans were forcibly removed from their homes.
What's interesting about Central Park, it was once an African-American community, Seneca Village, and now there's an ancient African monument. There's an obelisk in Central Park right now that's from ancient Africa, from ancient Kemet, and a lot of people don't even realize it's there.
A lot of people think that the enslavement of African people was only down south. That's not true. The largest plantation in the 13 colonies at one point in history was in Brooklyn, New York. And you know that area down there, down by Battery Park, where they used to bring the ships into that area, the port. And they would dock the ships, and they would bring the Africans up out the ships, and they would walk them across to be sold. However, what they did was, because they couldn't sell all of them, they used to put them in different prisons along this particular path. And then they would march the Africans that they were ready to sell down the street called Wall Street, down into a place we today call the New York Stock Exchange. African people were the first stocks and bonds sold on the stock exchange. There's a movie by Bruce Willis that will show you the prisons that are underground the stock exchange building.
Wiley Jones was a former African-American slave who went into Arkansas. He stacked his money up and he became a railroad owner. He owned a railroad system, and the city of Pine Bluff, Arkansas ended up buying his railroad system, and that system is still owned by Pine Bluff right now. Patterson Car Company was a car company founded by former slaves, African-American men, and the Patterson Car Company was the first African-American car manufacturer in the country, I think the only manufacturer in the country. And what's interesting about the Patterson Car Company, it was in Ohio. Their cars were considered higher quality than the Model T cars that Henry Ford had.
Do away from Ford and stole it. That's why all over the world, Ford never gets credit for inventing a car. He gets credit for mass production.
The cars began coming off the assembly line at the rate of 1 every 40 seconds.
Until that, they take one car and put it together. One car and put it together. But where can you get that from? George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver was never around black folk till he went to Tuskegee. His mother and father died or was killed. A white family adopted him from Iowa. You know black folks in Iowa? Such football players. So he went to grade school, high school, and they didn't have no secondary school. They didn't have enough people. And so now George Washington Carver leaves after he gets all this education come out there. He goes to Tuskegee. Henry Ford came down to visit, like he always see his friend. Mr. Ford, I got something here. Study plants. So if you take this back and give it to your engineers, they can build more than one car at a time. He took it back. Mass production all over the world is called the plant, right?
Everybody made joke of him because they said, well, you know, what, the plants are talking to him? You know, is this how he's getting these properties of these plants? And George Washington Carver, in his quiet, dignified way, said, well, who talked? I'm not saying that they talk to me like they got a tongue, but I can look at a plant and see what it can do for the human family.
The military came to George Washington Carver. They said, we need you to do something for us. Can you invent something that out of it we can get paint, glue, ink, and plastic? Young Hamlin, they tell me how smart black folk are. Young Hamlin. So he came back, called soybean. Now you want to hear something funny? The #1 cancer group in America is vegetarians. Because you weren't supposed to eat soy. When he got to Tuskegee, they thought he was gay. No association with women, high-pitched voice, they thought he was gay.
The finest use we've been able to make of peanuts is in the treatment of the after effects of infantile paralysis.
And he'd rather for you to believe he was gay than tell you that the white folks that adopted him castrated him so he couldn't have sex with their daughter. Like, who wanted him, huh? Did you see King Kong, New York City, Empire State Building? That's about Jack Johnson and white ladies. Why would the gorilla go to New York? They ain't got no bananas, and Lord knows ain't no trees. Why did they go there? The boxing capital of the world is Madison Square Garden. If you don't know how to break it down, you also controlling the pace of the fight.
We have to understand that in our celebration of Jack Johnson and that one-on-one, not mano-a-mano, man, this is you and me, and this is what we're going to deal with. There were lynchings the day after every fight. And that's very important to understand as it relates to the psychology. He used to love to drive. He used to love to speed. And he'd be speeding someplace, and the police would stop him. And because they saw that he was a person of African descent, because they saw the car that he was driving, some may have known who he was, but they said, well, what this man doing with this car? They would fine him. They say, okay, we're going to give you a ticket for speeding. Here's $500 ticket. $500 for speeding back then? Story has it, he'd give him $1,000. He said, because I'm speeding back.
In the sport of boxing, there has always been a need for the great white hope in boxing. Since there could not be one in real life, Hollywood just created one, and that's what the Rocky movies were about.
They were giving out the awards in Rocky 1, okay, the Oscar. And Muhammad Ali came out, and he was the one that gave Sylvester Stallone the award.
But can't you feel, Morty? I'm the real Apollo Creed. You stole my ship.
And Ali, in his most powerful way, came out and said, you know that story was about me. He said, you know that was about me. You know that y'all dream about beating a black man. He said, but you know what? The only place you'll ever do it is in Hollywood.
This is a society that loves women. This is a society that loves motherhood. This is a society that loves babies. Just not black women, black motherhood, black babies.
There is no more fierce warrior than a black woman. We just got the fierceness in the wrong direction. You know, we just got it all backwards. If we decided to stand up for you and say, no, you're not going to say that about him, or every time something said about him, we said, no, that's not true. That's the first thing I said on television. Oh, no, he's a good man. He's the best man there is. Well, that sound is not in the airwaves. Don't say nobody saying that. You know, if we started taking that position, all things would change for you.
The image of the black woman has consistently been complicated. So, you know, you get the mammy image, right? And that mammy image was one, you know, the kind of Aunt Jemima. The mammy image, coming from slave days, was one who was really good to massa. but knew how to control her own people, particularly knew how to control the man in the slave community. And so where she's like all huggy, snuggly with the white child and yeah, whatever you need. When she was back in the slave cabin, she's domineering.
You have the concept of the African woman as the Jezebel. She's free with herself. And then you have the mammy complex, where you have the heavier set woman. Neither one of them is wrong. Neither one of them is bad. That might just be their attitude. But they could be good, solid people. But in order to assuage your conscience, in order to make you feel better about yourself as to why you raped her or why you beat her or why you treat her the way you do, you say, well, she ain't nothing anyway. So that's how I'm going to make myself feel better while I mistreat her.
Their sex is promiscuous, right? And how do you know? Well, this is literally out of a medical journal. Their protruding buttocks and genitals were offered as evidence of their pathology of lust. Because they had big butts.
We accept you as you are, exactly, and you are beautiful to us in that way. But we don't believe that because of outside interference. And so they've given us this artificiality as a concept of what beauty is. And so we want to have all these other things, which are still mimicking white women.
We have seen hot combs in Egypt. African women did use hot combs on their hair. But they did not have a woman of European descent who they were emulating to look like that.
6% of America's population. 98% of fibroids in America. Black women. The next highest group, Jewish women. What they got in common? Nappy hair. How come my mother never heard of fibroids? How come they didn't get fibroids? You can't catch it. It ain't a disease. How we getting perms? When we start using perms, those chemicals go through my skull. And that's how I get fibroids.
Now, fortunately, there is a trend out there where black sisters are coming back natural a little bit. Now, part of that was voluntary, and the other part is that those perms have burned up and messed their hair up a lot. They're having to go natural now. And the other thing is that wearing those tight braids on the side of their head has pulled out spots around their hair. Some of them, the hairline starts back there, because of the braids being so tight. We're not in the African sun. It's not creating the same type of oils on our scalp as here in the hills of North America, where you have 4 different seasons and terrible weather. And so that hasn't worked on our hair, even though, and some of that hair is made from raccoons, horses, hyenas. It's made from anything, and they put it together and ship it over here and sell it there.
I was getting a doll for one of my daughters. There was a white mother and a white girl, little girl, in the doll section. And the mother said, you can have any doll you want. I saw, I just watched the little girl. She was walking around, and I was looking at dolls, too, and I was looking to see which one. And all of a sudden, the little girl took a brown doll, a black doll. And the mother said to her, why do you want that doll? She said, because it's pretty. She said, no, it ain't pretty. And not only that, it don't look like you. That's what a white mother told a white child. It don't look like you. And it's not a pretty doll. What happens to the black child when that young white girl meets that black child? What's been ingrained in that little girl's head? See, the adults are the problem.
We have more power as black women than we will ever understand that we have. And so they come to the people with the power when they want to control a group or a nationality.
Teach a child that you are beautiful. I had a little girl say to me, my nose is too big. I said, well, can you breathe? She said, yeah, I can breathe. I said, well, your nose is just right.
When they make baby food, they really make it for the mother, because the mother's not going to get a baby nothing that she don't like. The baby ain't never had sugar, salt, pepper, and chemicals. So the baby is sitting in your lap, and you feeding it, and they see that white baby on there. You don't see it. They see it. And every time she put the milk, good feeling run through their body. Now they got tests that you can flash a white child, and a good feeling run through your body even after you've grown.
Slave mistress, she didn't allow black women to nurse her baby because she didn't produce milk. Because nature will produce milk in a woman's breast if she has a child. So they had their own breast milk, but it was not the same nutrients as that black breast milk. And that's why they put their babies to our breasts, so that we
could give them all the nutrients and put all of those vitamins and everything into that child that they needed so it would grow up strong and healthy like our babies were.
There's a case called the Buck versus Bell case that makes it perfectly legal for the government to sterilize a person without their consent. And they can sterilize people they deem as undesirables. And that case has never been overturned. That case came from 1927. And right now, a lot of African-American women are being sterilized in prison. A lot of African-American women are being sterilized with birth control. So a lot of people don't realize that this sterilization process is real and is perfectly legal in a lot of cases.
And they're not only coming after us for birth control to get us to sterilize ourselves so we can produce, they're coming after us for our stem cells. Because this is what the white scientific industry is using now in order to come up with all of these new technologies and discoveries about how to save their lives, how to be youthful, how to do heart repair without surgery and all of that. All of that comes from the stem cells, hysterectomies of the 70s and 80s. See, that was the way to sterilize black women then. Every other black woman you met had a hysterectomy, okay? Just take all of the organs out and don't have to deal with it.
When I say slave babies to you in America, what do you mentally, what do you see? You see black men and women with things on their neck, you know, chains, and on their feet so they can't run away. You know, that's what you see. You don't see that on children. Children are going to follow their parents. You see children running free, following behind their parents.
The 1700s, there was an act called the Casual Killing Act in Virginia. And what this was a law that said that if you killed someone, black, as a result of correcting them, but it would not be considered a felony, but anyone accused, so giving that punishment would be basically free of any punishment or any wrongdoing, called the Casual Killing Act. Stay with me. That means you were beating people to death, essentially. What we're talking about here is folks that were beating people to death to such a degree that you had to create a law to protect you from it. Now then, of course, if one looks closely, go, who then were they trying to protect? That was beating someone to death so frequently that you needed a law to protect them. And that would be white women who were beating black children to death. Because, well, whose children were they really?
There's a case down in South Carolina where the police had rounded up this woman's husband. She went down to the jail talking about, you know, my man didn't do this. You let him go. Well, she didn't know her place. She was 8 months pregnant. She didn't know her place. The lynch mob took her, stripped her naked, strung her up. They notice as she's gagging, because, you know, they're hanging her, is that her stomach, because she's naked, is quivering. So they get a knife and they slice her belly open. The 8-month baby comes out and they stomp on the baby's head. Nothing happens.
The youngest person electrocuted in this country to receive capital punishment by the government was a young African-American 14-year-old boy named George Stinney, and he was falsely accused of killing 2 white girls. Recently, the government is trying to issue a pardon for him, and that's what they do a lot of times. When we suffer injustice, they'll wait 50 or 60 years in order to give a pardon or to try to right the wrong after the fact. I think they'll try to probably do that with Trayvon Martin 40 years from now.
That was sad what happened to Trayvon Martin, and I felt so badly for his parents. Nobody wants to outlive their children. Okay? But do you hear his name anymore? Very rare. And one of the other reasons is that they started a Trayvon Martin Foundation. Well, blacks ain't got no foundation unless they're supported by white money. Okay? And part of the agreement for the foundation is that no more of that race stuff. We're going to work for the humanity of man. We're going to work so we can all get along and in unity or something. You know, all of us are the same. And that's the nonsense you go. And so his parents had to pull back on that talk they were talking at first.
So about 4 or 5 black police officers, big guys, I'll never forget, because I looked up and they like had muscles on top of muscles. These are some big brothers. And they showed up, and I'm assuming they want a book or something. And this guy has a stack of 8x10 glossy pictures, and he hands them to me, but they slide, and they're all lynchings. And I didn't look at them at first. I'm going, well, yeah, I'm really familiar with lynchings, done a lot of research. He goes, no, you're not familiar with these. So I look at them in their contemporary literature. He says they're telling us these are suicides. And you're seeing all these different bodies of all black males.
He worked in a drugstore, and he sent a white girl that he worked with a Christmas card. Her father clocked. Her father got the lynch mob together. They grabbed that 14-year-old boy, and they grabbed the boy's father. They went out to the bridge. They beat the crap out of that boy. They tied his hands. They bound his feet. They yanked the father's head to force the father to watch as they threw the boy into the water, alive with his hands bound and feet bound, to watch his son drown.
If a white group of boys do something, they'll say, 4 white teens broke into a store downtown. If a black group of boys do it, 4 black men broke into this place and did this and did that. They use a different language for what they give their children and what they give ours. If the black boys do something, they put their faces right up on the camera. I don't care how old they are. That's where the new ruling came from about trying as an adult. That was against you, okay? And then if a white boy do something, they put a screen over their face, or they'll show the back of his head.
And I say if a person just turns on the television, you put a child in front of the television for 6 months, they will learn racism, white supremacy, because they're seeing white. There may be a black image, hopefully one that's constructed, but many times not. So the culture is teaching itself 24/7, as all cultures do.
If you look at what happens in our schools as it relates to institutional white supremacy, you still see the child being impacted horrifically by the miseducation of the child and their minds. My argument is psychologically that when you have a young woman of European descent, 23 years of age, in a classroom of children that are in the 7th grade, 12, 13, 14, there's going to be very serious social problems in that classroom. Many times when a young African American may act out in class, that teacher takes it personal and believes that he is attempting to cause physical harm to her. A sister in the class, at least, not all sisters, but I know a lot of sisters, something going on, she said, Kwame, sit down, man. Stop. She doesn't take it personal because she probably has a little Kwame at home. That she sees him as a young man that's just doing his thing.
The teacher said that he was making sexual advances towards her. He was 10, first off. That's not a good thing they're going. You know what he did? He flipped her the bird. I said, no, he wasn't suggesting sexual intercourse with you. He was telling you where to go and how far. But you see, again, that's where she went because she sexualizes all black males. That's what her dad probably told her about black males, even at 10, who doesn't even have any legitimate amount of testosterone to even be thinking about her. But still, you know, again, but that's what's been told. All black men are trying to rape white women, right? When in fact, the opposite was true. We have this statistic. We know who was being raped. It wasn't white women. But isn't that what's out there?
Body parts. They've been selling body parts. That's old. That's not new. That's why black people don't like to go to hospitals. They go to get their toes clipped, their fingernails clipped, and they wake up and their foot's gone.
They've been utilizing the organs of black people for years, the organs and the body parts and the members of African American people, and that goes back to George Washington. There's a long-time myth that George Washington had wooden teeth. We've heard that myth growing up in school. The reality is George Washington did not have wooden teeth because common sense will tell you you can't put wood in your mouth, it gets wet, and wet wood is useless. What George Washington did, he had the teeth of his African slaves yanked out of their mouths, and he made dentures out of these teeth. And they're on display. His dentures are on display at museums right now. And that just goes to show the history of African people having our bodies mutilated and our members disfigured and mutilated for the betterment and benefit of the dominant society.
In America, at least 2,500 black people go missing every year. At least. Never to be found again. Not killed enough. You just don't find them again. Why doesn't that number ever go down? How can you constantly have the same amount of people? Are you trying to say the same killers go out and murder the same amount of people every year? No. Somebody is taking black people off the street. There's been stories on this. Kidnapped by the government. Kidnapped by organ traffickers.
Drive-by shooting is organ stealing.
I'm worth $50 million and I need a kidney. And you know, kidneys are pretty sensitive. You got to find somebody who really got the kidney that matches yours. You think I'm going to wait till somebody die for me to get one? If I don't get one soon, I'm going to die. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to pay somebody to go research people. Okay, let's go look at all the black organ donors. Let's look at all the black people who got organ donor on their driver's license, which is why I'm not a friend of that. I said, if you want to donate your organs, put it in your will. Say that if I die, this could go to my family, my relatives, my friends, or whomever. But when you put it on your license, I believe you make yourself a public target. And so what did they find? We got a guy in Los Angeles. He has the same blood type as you, same kidney type as you likely. He healthy though. He ain't likely to die no time soon. He don't know you, so he ain't gonna give you no organ for free. So guess what we're gonna do? We're gonna arrange a murder that makes it look like he was in a car accident. We're gonna arrange a murder that makes it look like he committed suicide. So the next thing you know, you coming out the gas station, boom, you get hit by a Mack truck. You dead, gone. You get taken to the funeral home. Your family come to the funeral. They don't know that before your body got laid to rest, a little hole was poked and they pulled your kidney out.
A lot of people don't know, when you get arrested or even when you get convicted, a lot of times law enforcement or police will swab your mouth for DNA. And now they have your DNA record on file, they have your genetic information on file. And you have to understand, with law enforcement, a lot of times they'll sell your information to tabloids and, like, especially celebrities, they sell their information to tabloids and magazines and news outlets all the time. So it's not a stretch to believe that they won't use your DNA or your genetic information for nefarious reasons.
You, my son, cops come by and inform me you just been shot dead. You don't have jurisdiction over that body. That's the coroner. You can't get that body till the coroner release you. So I get released, we go around and pick it up, and I see all these cuts and these stitches. I just thought they was doing a routine investigation, following the fan, and they took your organs. I'm under all this stress, my son is dead. Now you buried now, I can't dig you up for the court, got the information. Most of those cases is organ stealing.
It's been known for a long time, even back in slavery times, that black organs were considered superior genetically to other folks' organs. For example, whenever there's a transplant, okay, especially when rich folks get heart transplant, liver transplant, kidney transplant, they like white, they like black organs. We had a famous case in Pennsylvania, Governor Casey, who was one of the most racist governors who ever lived, back in the late 80s, early 90s. He had a heart transplant. Guess whose heart they gave him? A black person's heart.
Down in Georgia, there was a case of an African-American 17-year-old kid who was found mysteriously dead at school. He died in the gym. They did an autopsy and they buried him. His family, they weren't satisfied with the results because they still wanted to know what happened to their son. They had the body exhumed, found out that his organs were missing and his body was stuffed with newspapers, and people are still trying to find answers. The officials down there in Georgia, they act like they don't know what's going on. There was another case out here in California. A young African-American man was found dead in Death Valley in the desert. All of his organs were missing. His liver, heart, lungs, kidneys, all gone. There's a case in the UK recently. A Somalian girl was brought over there for organ harvesting. They found out that they were going to harvest her organs, and they stopped that. There was another case, an Asian couple. They went over to Africa. They adopted a black girl. 2 weeks later, she was dead. So these cases of organ harvesting are just going on all over the world, and people are being real quiet about it.
The Rodney King riots. The cops arrested 18,213 black folks. They couldn't account for 10,000 of them.
That's what happened in New Orleans. Remember when you saw those helicopters? They were picking up all them black babies and taking them up in the helicopter. And my husband and I sit there and said, we wouldn't have sent our son with them. I don't care who they were. We all died in the war together. We wouldn't have sent our baby up there with. And they never got a bunch of those children back, as we all know.
Organ harvesting in Africa, it's a business. In fact, they've set up so many sophisticated places around the so-called third world where there are nations like France, England, New Zealand, Israel. All these places now are looking in the impoverished areas because mostly in these impoverished areas like Brazil, places in South Africa, right here on this continent, wherever there's poverty, there's crime. And wherever there's crime, you know there's a lot of deaths and there's a lot of shooting.
They are killing black people for their organs. Think about it. Organs are the only commodity that people must have to live that you cannot buy in a store. So if I am sick and I need a heart, I can't buy that. And we know all the problems with the fake hearts, that it can give a pacemaker to a bad heart. But what about when the heart needs to be replaced? You gotta find a match, and it ain't none on the donor list, and I'm worth $50 million, and I could care less about black people anyway? Guess what? Somebody gonna get shot in a drive-by.
Switch over to Haiti. Jean Bellerive, at the time, he was the prime minister at the time when Haiti was hit with that earthquake that killed over 130,000 brothers and sisters down there in that island. They had a report on CNN with Jean Bellerive, and he said specifically that there was organ harvesting and child kidnapping going on.
And we have already reports of a lot of trafficking, even of organ trafficking.
Of organ trafficking? Yeah.
Now, already.
Of the victims of the earthquake?
Yeah. So,
do you know that for sure?
Yeah, I know that for sure, and it was discussed in Montreal during the conference.
If you live in Los Angeles and you want to adopt a black child, why not get one from Los Angeles? You have every age, every skin color, every hair type, whatever you want, it's here. Because black kids are not being adopted by black people. But instead, you want to go all the way to Ethiopia and get one. You want to go all the way to Haiti and get one after the earthquake. You want to go all the way to the Middle East and get one. And East Africa and a Middle Eastern country, I believe, are the two top countries for international adoption. Why? Because they have poor supervision and tracking processes. Once you get a baby from Ethiopia, and as we know, Ethiopia is one of the poorest countries on the continent. Once you get a baby from Ethiopia and bring them back to America, the Ethiopian government and their adoption agency really don't have the technology or the resources to follow up and see what you're doing with that child. In fact, I've read articles on it where they say that after about 6 months, we never hear from the child again or the person who adopted them.
They'll take their children, a lot of them, because they're desperate for money, and sell them to a white family as a maid. They don't know that the husband gonna be in there raping the child, boy or girl. They don't know that that child may have to sleep out in the garbage, eat garbage. They don't know really how it's going to be when they get us alone and there's no help coming and no sanctuary for us.
If I want to create a domestic slave, domestic slavery, what better way than to get a child from Haiti who's dying to leave Haiti because they've been poor their whole life, and now they're 9 years old, bring them to America, and after all, I'm a Hollywood superstar, okay? They see me on TV every night. I got a mansion with 3 swimming pools. They've never seen nothing like that in Haiti. And then I tell them, you don't even have to go to school. All you have to do is stay here and do what I tell you to do. We need you to clean this, fold that, buy this, run these errands. They are adopting black children and turning them into domestic house slaves for rich white people. And they will never get in trouble because the black children see this change of life as a blessing. I'm not going to tell. They don't make me go to school, but look how I live. I live great. Yeah, I'm a slave and I don't get paid, but look how I live. I'm living great.
There's a movie that came out a couple of years ago, and you can watch this movie on Netflix. There's a movie called I Am Slave. It's the true story about an African girl who was kidnapped, and she was brought over to Europe, forced to work as a domestic, and she actually escaped to tell her story. And this is very common. That's going on right now, and a lot of people don't know about it. As a matter of fact, a lot of times when you go to places like New York and you see a lot of domestic workers walking around with these white children, you just naturally think they're regular nannies that they hired. But a lot of these women are African immigrants or Haitian immigrants or Caribbean immigrant women who are undocumented. They're brought over and they're made to work for little or no money. So this modern type of slavery definitely goes on right now.
Find themselves at a school meeting, black mother seated next to the white mother, son seated on either side of them. Black mother leans over to the white mother and goes, oh, by the way, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed your son is doing really well. And the white mother goes, well, thank you so much. He really is. He's quite the man. He's in the TAG program. Did I mention that? He also won the science fair last week. His uncle's an astronaut. The boy's brilliant. She's thrilled to death, oozing with pride for this black mother commenting and complimenting her son. Then the white mother sits back, and before she can sit back fully, she realizes that the black mother's son is actually excelling her son. So she stops and she goes, wait a minute, you're talking about my son? Your son's the one that's really coming along. Well, that boy's really, oh my goodness, he's doing well. Black mother's response, girl, get out of here. Ooh, yeah, that boy's something else. So, he's a handful. Girl, get out of town. Now, the behavior is common across class. But why is she doing it, right? Now, the truth is, the secret is everybody black knows that even though she's going, girl, get out, quit talking, but that boy's a knucklehead, she's really proud. Throw that whole scene back that you have a white slave owner come through, male or female, see a black mother maybe with her children in the fields, or a black father with the children in the big house, whatever, and that white person says to the black person, Ma, is that your boy? Ah, that boy's sure coming along. What are you going to say to him? Well, no, so he's stupid, he's shiftless, because I don't want you to sell him. If it's my daughter, I don't want you to breed her. Appropriate adaptation of living in a hostile environment. We never unlearned that. Never did.
It's 12:47. Come here, sneaking over. I see you. See you too. Come here. Catch him in the dome. What's up, Deaf Gamer?
When we were put into slavery, we were beat into submission, and the person that we looked up to was the slave master. So what you have to understand, a lot of black people in America look at themselves through the eyes of the slave master. We feel the same way that they feel about us. We want the same thing.
There have always been laws that would pit African American people against other African American people. During slavery, they had a law called the Meritorious Manumission Law, where African people would get rewarded for turning in another African slave, or turning in a person who wanted to create some type of rebellion or runaway slave. So there were all types of incentives to give African American people for turning on each other.
I mean, all of our major organizations are supporting black people who classify themselves as white. So it becomes difficult to bite the hand that feeds you.
Give the illusion of inclusion. And under the illusion of inclusion, we're actually going to take them back to Jim Crow. That's what they're doing. They're taking us back as they give us the propaganda of going forward, and they do this through the who? Black bourgeoisie. Every city got a black bourgeoisie. This is how white supremacy operates. A numerical minority cannot control a numerical majority without participation from the majority. It's impossible.
A lot of black secret societies are secret to the black community, because you're not secret to the dominant society, because if you're a black secret society or a black organization, either you're going to be funded by the dominant society or you're going to be infiltrated by the dominant society. So a lot of these black organizations are secret to black people.
If you look at most uber rich black people, I'm not talking about the rappers, because that's not moving the financial scope. But I'm talking about the black people that really are making money, especially the men. You don't see anything cultural about them. You usually don't see no beard. You usually don't see no long hair. They're not threatening at all. You never see them stand for anything. And a few of them may stand when all of the black people are standing, so they won't look bad. Like they'll jump on the Trayvon bandwagon and throw a hoodie on and, take a pose for the camera. They're not really gonna move the pose. And that's what I keep telling people. A lot of black people who are doing very well for themselves, who benefited off the system being the way that it is,
Why would they change?
A lot of the black secret societies, they were started because many of the people were the mulatto offspring of slave masters. As a matter of fact, in South Carolina, there was a group called the Brown Fellowship Society, and they were basically freed Africans who were the offspring of the slave masters, and they didn't want to identify themselves with black, and they couldn't be accepted by the dominant society, so they called themselves brown. They settled on that. And there was a major uprising that was going to happen in South Carolina, the Denmark Vesey resurrection. And there were members of this organization called the Brown Fellowship Society that told on the Denmark Vesey rebellion leaders.
Money is an anesthetic. It kind of dulls the pain a little bit. You know, well, maybe I can make it. Well, it ain't so bad. Well, there's some good ones out there. I mean, we come up with a whole new scenario around to talk about once we get really, really big success.
Flat and impoverished. It is the last place on earth to look for the extraordinary or for the shadow of greatness.
For generations, black people have been economically disenfranchised by different laws, different types of public policies. So because there's economic deprivation, it's very easy to find black people who need the money and who are willing to throw other black people under the bus for money. So this is why it's important for African American people, or us in general, to have rules and integrity when we're trying to get our paper, because like they say, man, all money is not good money.
There's tons of millionaire rap artists alone. 20 years ago, there was no record deals. There was no shows for just anybody. Now everybody's touching some money. So what rules? The rules is go get money. So all the rules went out the way. All the rules were forgotten. You know what I'm saying? And what happens is, dudes get lost because they never had to follow no rules. They never looked up to anybody that was a stand-up person. So it's all about paper. There is no rules. So what happens is they wind up one day, I got a little money and I don't know why I don't have no real respect. Because they forgot to look at the examples before them.
What did a promotion mean for black folks? Let's just take a look at what promotions meant. Okay, if you're promoted as a woman, the likelihood is you are either going to be breeder, right? You're going to end up getting bred or passed around as favor, right? So there's fear around, inherent fear around being promoted. If you're a man, you get promoted into what? An overseer? So then you get promoted into being my oppressor. So I'm not all that interested in you getting promoted. Or maybe, you get promoted into being a stud, right? You get promoted into, here's another one, being a preacher. Interesting, all the things that happen around that.
At one time, the churches used to be a place that was some power for us and where we could go and have certain discussions or mobilize and things. Well, faith-based money that Bush came up with eliminated that, because once the churches applied for and got that money, they couldn't say nothing else about racism no more. They bought them out.
There was another organization called the Blue Vein Society down in New Orleans, and they were called the Blue Vein Society because they were mulatto black people who would only let other light-skinned black people in the organization. The rule was you had to be light enough so they could see your blue veins. That's why they call themselves the Blue Vein Society. Even now, and until recently, a lot of so-called black organizations, they've had this brown paper bag test. You had to be a certain skin tone in order to be accepted. So there are a lot of these black secret societies that take on a lot of the negative viewpoints of the dominant society, or that the dominant society have of other black folk.
We know that the first full-time FBI agent in American history, black agent, was actually hired to infiltrate the Marcus Garvey movement, working under the supervision of J. Edgar Hoover to destabilize it.
African American people are the only people who are rewarded for turning on other African American people. You don't see that with other people in the dominant society. You don't see Latino people being rewarded for turning on other Latino people. You don't see Asian people being rewarded for turning on other Asian people. But if there are African American people who are willing to talk badly or negatively about other African American people, or throw other African American people under the bus, they get book deals, they get TV shows, they get radio show deals. So there are all types of rewards and incentives for African Americans to throw other African Americans under the bus. And this comes directly from slavery.
At one time, the black man had to grin and smile all the time. Everything, it didn't matter what. You had to keep grinning, keep smiling. That was to show all of the white people that you were not hostile and you was a happy Negro. You were...
She was a happy Negro. I'm gone. It's fine.